I'm not going to be saying anything anymore here because you guys get those videos and go to town with them.
What kind of childhood did Walter have?
But despite the problems that we have with the supply of electricity in Zambia, you still supply us with electricity.
Thank you so much for joining in and, joining in. Oh, no. I missed it. Let me do that one more time. Thank you so much for joining in. Today's Monday and welcome. Yes. No. Thank you so much for joining in and welcome. That's better. That's better. I think you know what I'm doing. You know what I'm doing. So thank you so much for joining in. Appreciate that you're joining us as we take a look at some of these stories that are making news in our country, and we also take a look at what's making news around the world. My name is Dingindaba Jonah Buyoya. There's a lot to unpack for us as a country. The last few days have been quite heavy. Beyond the last few days, actually. I mean, life is always very, very tough, generally. I think that's the nature of living. So we only pick a few of the things that are troubling us, but we also look at the ones that are troubling us the most at a specific time. So what are we going to be talking about? Well, we're going to be talking about the aid freeze by the United States government. And this is continuing because there's so much going on with this aid freeze. Africa is not the only affected. Even the U.S. itself, there's been some federal aid that's been cut, grants and loans, as part of an extended program by the Donald Trump administration. We'll talk about all of this on the podcast, but we'll also talk about the cancer patients, the report that has been issued by the Ministry of Health revealing 9,000 cancer patients dying in Zambia in a single year. Cholera. A lot to do with the health sector, isn't it? 3 people have died. 4 people now. The total number of people that have died is 4 in the last 7 days from a cholera outbreak in Chidilabombwe. President Hakainde Hichilema is he's not in the United States. He's in the United States of Tanzania. Yes, actually, that's what it is. It's the United States of Tanzania. Yes. Yes. Also because there's Zanzibar there that is governed by one person. Anyway, let's start off first of all with the aid issue. And there's 2 angles that we're going to take a look at this. And the first is Zambia's healthcare system facing a threat as the United States government holds funding to critical health programs. And this has left the sector in a very uncomfortable position. We've got reliable information from the Center for Infectious Disease Control and Research in Zambia, CIDES, who have suspended all training programs and workshops, and some staff members have also been sent home indefinitely as uncertainty spreads throughout the sector. The Ministry of Health is going to release a statement tomorrow, and they're outlining the way forward for the affected programs. And this is because of a high-level meeting that they were having today with the U.S. government officials that was led by the ministry's permanent secretary for, guess what, donor coordination, Dr. George Sinyangwe.
Looming job cuts and halted funding are threatening Zambia's healthcare system, particularly in programs critical to the fight against HIV and AIDS. The government is now scrambling to respond to the unfolding crisis. The Zambian government is set to engage U.S. officials in high-level discussions today to address the reported halt in funding for HIV drug distribution and related health programs. And Ministry of Health Permanent Secretary for Donor Coordination, Dr. George Sinyangwe, has confirmed that the outcome of these discussions will shape the government's official response, which will be announced tomorrow. This development follows the United States Agency for International Development's decision to pause funding obligations under the Development Objective Agreements earlier this week. The move aligns with a new executive order by U.S. President Donald Trump, leading to a broader review of foreign assistance programs. Organizations like the Center for Infectious Disease Research in Zambia, CIDES, are already feeling the effects with reports of suspended workshops, halted training, and some staff being sent home indefinitely. Health experts warn that such disruptions could undermine global progress in fighting HIV and AIDS, particularly in low-income countries like Zambia, which rely heavily on donor funding. Adding to Zambia's challenges, the U.S. has listed 174 Zambians among illegal immigrants awaiting deportation. U.S. Customs and Immigration Enforcement, ICE, reports approximately 1.4 million illegal immigrants have been ordered for deportation nationwide, with 13,000 currently in custody. Elfimale Champande, Diamond News.
So this is a very tough moment, maybe not for the broader health sector, because we also have to put a lot of these things in context, that the Zambian government does in fact fund about 80% of its budget, is of its health sector. And, you know, they've got 20% that they get support. So 80% is a huge percentage for them to be funding. But I think we need to add a bit of context to why this is specifically important. The Zambian government does not fund this specific angle that we're talking about, and that is the HIV treatment. They fund it to, I believe, around 15%. And the rest of it, of these free drugs, are from cooperating partners. And what is unique or interesting about these cooperating partners is that we've got the PEPFAR initiative, which is the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief by the United States government. President George Bush was behind all of this. But the issue is, PEPFAR is only one of the initiatives, right? But the other initiatives are also supported by the U.S. government. The U.S. government, through USAID, is one of the major funders of various non-governmental organizations and various projects. There's, among the major funders, you will move around and you're going to find that a lot of the projects are supported by the U.S. government. So even if it's the Global Fund for AIDS, even if it's UNAID, even if we're talking about the World Health Organization, the biggest contributor to the World Health Organization is the United States government. And they are withdrawing funding as well from the World Health Organization. They are actually planning on leaving the World Health Organization. And this is an ongoing conversation. In fact, the African Union were today asking the U.S. government to reconsider this because it's going to have huge implications. But let's come back to what has happened now. Last week, we heard of the news just shortly after U.S. President Donald Trump was inaugurated. He signed executive orders. One of the executive orders was suspension of funding of aid. Even the U.S. is now experiencing this because he has also suspended federal grants and loans even for some United States citizens. And I understand that the Democrats are planning on taking President Donald Trump to court. But Zambia's health sector is also in a very tough position at the moment because of this directive to halt the disbursement of HIV medication that was purchased with US aid as it is taking effect. This is not just happening in Zambia, it's across the African continent that this is moving because this initiative, the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, has supported 25 million people worldwide. And Zambia is highly dependent on this PEPFAR support. I also have to say, I said this in my article, which I shared, that from inception, we have to also take a level of responsibility that it puts us in a very tight and awkward position. We cannot claim entitlement to another country's taxpayers' money. It puts us in a very awkward position because those are citizens of that country, and these are their resources. They're not ours. That's their money. That's their taxpayers' money. So it belongs to them. But it is also important to add some context to some of these things, right? That aid has a history to it. And part of that history is the lag in development on the African continent doesn't just come from the African continent. It comes from several aspects. And that's when the world came together to try and find ways in which they could support Africa. It's a very controversial topic. But I think that another thing we need to consider is there's millions of lives that are at risk here. And why I use the word at risk is because this freeze with a 90-day review period is in every angle. So even drugs that have already been dispatched and are here in the African countries cannot leave these clinics. They cannot leave these clinics until whatever we're waiting for happens. What is the purpose of that? What is the objective of this? That some of these drugs have already reached their destination countries, they cannot be distributed. And yet, we know that there are people that rely on this on a daily basis for them to survive. But I guess that's also the awakening moment that I'm talking about. We cannot have one country having you on chokehold like that. You can't. There's no way. It's immoral. It's immoral. I think it's unethical for one single country to have that much power over another country. It's not right. And this is the conversation we should also now start having. I know that it's a conversation that people have had and have talked about this for a long time, but we cannot be at the mercies to this extent that they say, we're going to freeze this aid, and you get into panic mode because reality strikes. And before, even if it so happened really that even if it so happened that this decision is reversed, it's a huge talking point, and we need a point of reflection as a society, as a people, on how we're going to move forward from this. Because we should never have to experience such uncertainty ever again. And before we hop on to the next rich uncle with our begging bowl, we need to have a discussion, an honest conversation here. If we can fund 80% of our health budget, we can work towards funding 100% of it. And maybe other things can be dependent on aid, but clearly the security of the country, the health of the country, cannot be dependent on a country that is miles away. The president of the United States doesn't even come here. Why should they care? Why should we be so dependent? And I think this is what we also need to be moving towards. But I also am very empathetic because I recognize the fact that right now, as we speak today, we're talking about real lives. We're talking about people's lives now. And I also want us to just take a look at the extent of the benefits that we've received from the U.S. government through initiatives like PEPFAR. This initiative, this program, since 2004, has funded 6.7 billion United States dollars in Zambia's health sector. And this has enabled more than 1.2 million people in Zambia to have access to the ART, which is antiretroviral treatment. This is 167 billion kwacha that we're talking about. And because of this support, the annual HIV-related deaths were halved, and over 86% of HIV-positive Zambians have undetectable viral loads, which effectively means that they cannot transmit to the next person unless they are reinfected. Last year in March, I think it was the 28th, I beg your pardon, I don't remember the exact date because I was only reading about this earlier in the day. 28th of March 2024, the US government announced funding of 367 million United States dollars. That's 9.2 billion kwacha for support to the Zambian national HIV response from March last year into this year. This is part of the money that is supposed to be working as we speak. So this freeze disrupts the supply chain for HIV in medications. And this is leaving clinics across Zambia and indeed the rest of Africa with drugs that they are now prohibited from distributing. Obviously, there's millions of people that are vulnerable. And this is the picture we need to paint. I know there's a lot of people that have somebody in the family that is working and can support, or some people are working themselves and they can buy antiretroviral treatment to continue on the plan. But there's vulnerable people that are not even able to buy food. Let's start from there. They have to depend on a social cash transfer program. You need to understand that the spread of HIV in communities was also synonymous to poverty. That some of the most poor are the ones that were found to be HIV positive because they did not have access to preventive measures. So that's why these initiatives came into place. And these are the most vulnerable in our society. So when you think of people being affected by such initiatives, those are the people that you must have in mind because they're the ones that are most likely to be affected. I just want us to have that. There's 15.4% HIV prevalence on the Copper Belt, 15.1% HIV prevalence here in Lusaka, and these are the most affected provinces. And the healthcare system is likely to get overwhelmed if this is not well looked into. And then the potential is also us going back to AIDS, right? Which problem we have worked towards dealing with, like I have already highlighted. The young people of Zambia, the women, in this case, are bearing a disproportionate share of the HIV burden. UNICEF, which is also partly funded by the United States government, states that only 60% of adolescents living with HIV are on treatment. And condom use among sexually active adolescents remains critically low, partly because of access as well. So this freeze on funding makes this situation much worse because there are some essential services like HIV testing, education, and prevention programs for these high-risk groups that are going to have to be cut. And that's just one side of this story. Is females aged 15 plus are about 26,000 new HIV infections every year, 19,000 males in a year. So what picture does this paint? Without continued access to antiretroviral treatment, these women are getting even at a higher risk, and they'll be transmitting this virus to their children and their partners. Because we've seen a reduction in mother-to-child transmission because of these interventions that are being put in place. And one of the interventions is that these mothers have got to be on treatment. When you go back to 2020, it's about 12,000 cases that were averted because of the mother-to-child transmission and because of these initiatives that have been put in place. And there's one part that I've not talked about, and it's the fact that we should also glance at the thousands of Zambians that are working in these organizations. There's thousands of Zambians that are working in these organizations that have been told to walk now. And you can imagine how abrupt this is. You've got a job and you don't have a job. It's terrible. It's terrible. But the bottom line also that we need to recognize is that this is the government's responsibility. It's the Zambian government's responsibility. It's their people. And the Zambian people are the responsibility of the Zambian government, not Donald Trump and his fellow Americans. Zambian citizens are a responsibility of the Zambian government, and Zambia should be dealing with this issue. But I think that it's kind of inhumane to take such a drastic to take such drastic action. And perhaps the future should also be like us phasing this out, and being able to sustain. I mean, I think that we finally are going to be having the conversation around the cost of inefficiency, because the cost of inefficiency is very high. I say this a lot here at work. The cost of inefficiency is very, very high. The cost of incompetence is very high. So the loopholes around corruption, the loopholes around bloated staff who are not productive, the cost of inefficiency is very high. That people are getting public resources and using them for personal gain. These are the consequences. We can't account for where our money is going. Just last week, we were talking about on this space. We were talking about the Constituency Development Fund. That we've got resources that are allocated to various constituencies that we are not even able to finish. We're not able to finish these resources, and yet we have this huge disparity in the standards of living in our country. Can you imagine that you are given, for argument's sake, 100 million kwacha, and you fail to use even 20% of that, simply because you are inefficient, incompetent, bottlenecks. This is where the money is. This is where our money is. You've got huge amounts of money being paid to build infrastructure that should improve our living standards, and people have been paid this money. They just don't do it. They just don't do it. You've got 4,000 projects that are supposed to start, and the money is readily available. At the end of the year, you've only done 900. What is that? Like, and you can clearly see it in our daily lives in this society. That's what we are having to deal with now. This is what we're having to deal with now. And I guess it's a huge burden. It's a huge burden that we have to bear, and ask ourselves if we are really gonna get out of this, if we're serious enough to get out of this. But it is an honest conversation that we need to have, that we should get out of this. We should stop depending so much on the support of another country, because it's a dangerous way to live. And we've seen the evidence now that someone, and I mean, if you've listened to their arguments, I don't want to think that they are a bunch of mad men and women. Their arguments are that they want to put their people first. You can't fault people for saying that. It hurts, and it hurts all of us that are now victims of this. I don't know if I should use the word victim, but I think we are. It hurts us, and we probably don't want to hear that. But they're saying they're putting their people first. We are not their people. We are thousands of miles away. We're here. And we have our own people that we should put first. So when you look at it in that context, you kind of just start looking back home and saying, what are we going to do? And speaking of what we're going to do, the government tomorrow is going to be issuing an official statement on what we're going to do about some of these projects that have been affected, because they had a meeting with the U.S. government officials earlier today, which I don't know how to feel about. That this has happened, because there was no discussion in the first place when this aid was being cut off and frozen. So we should really be looking at internal solutions and internal long-term solutions. And to be fair, this is not something that we should expect to convert immediately, but we should be optimistic and positive and hardworking enough for us to be able to achieve it in the near future. And I'm about to get into another health story, another health story where there's a lot of funding that is coming from the international community, and this is the continued burden of cancer-related illnesses and deaths. There's 15,000 new cancer cases that are recorded every year, and 9,000 of those result in death. And just last week, I lost a friend to cancer. She'd been battling it for a long time, and I have to say, she fought really hard. It was really, really hard, very, very hard fight. She had a son that she's left behind, and every time she would talk about how she was fighting for him, but it did take a toll on her, and unfortunately, she died last week. But the highest burden of cancer comes from cervical cancer, with about 3,600 new cases, and this is followed by Kaposi sarcoma, which is 2,400 cases. Prostate cancer is at 1,600 cases. Breast cancer is at 1,100 cases every single year. And like I said, there's a lot of support that comes here as well. The cervical cancer screening. There was a story just yesterday that we're doing about cervical cancer screening and the support that we're receiving from from you guess who, and other cooperating partners.
In Zambia, cancer is an emerging health crisis affecting individuals and communities across the country, with rising incidences of various types of cancer, from breast and cervical cancer to prostate and leukemia. The disease has become a significant public health challenge. Over 15,000 cases are recorded annually, and cervical cancer accounts for more of these cases.
We record over 15,000 new cancer cases annually. Unfortunately, the majority of new cancer cases, which is about 9,000 people, die from the disease. The highest burden of cancer comes from cervical cancer, with about 3,600 new cases, Kaposi sarcoma, 2,400, prostate cancer, 1,600, breast cancer, 1,100, and esophageal cancer, 500 new cases annually.
World Cancer Day, observed every year on February 4th, provides a powerful platform for raising awareness about cancer prevention, treatment, and care. This year, Zambia, like many other countries, is gearing up to commemorate the day with various activities aimed at fostering greater understanding of the disease.
The theme that will be carried through from 2025 to 2027 emphasizes a people-centered approach to cancer care. It aims to replace individuals and communities at the heart of health systems and cancer care strategies. The United by Unique campaign focuses on integrating the unique experiences and needs of individuals affected by cancer into health services.
Dr. Susan Msadabwe is Cancer Diseases Hospital Superintendent.
The heightened activities regarding awareness, prevention, and screening in order for us to detect cancer early. As we know, most cancers are actually curable as long as they are detected early. The high mortality rate that we see in Zambia currently is because most of the cancer patients that we do diagnose are actually diagnosed at a late stage. So this event raises that awareness, leading to early detection and therefore better outcomes.
As Zambia joins the rest of the world in recognizing the fight against cancer, it is a call to action for everyone to stay informed, encourage healthy lifestyles, and support one another in the battle against this devastating disease. Victoria Kayeye Yambani, Diamond News.
So we've got a lot of work cut out for us as a country, because when it comes to cancer, the Cancer Diseases Hospital has a few resources. It's underfunded. It's underfunded extremely. Despite the huge number of people that we're seeing being infected and dying, it's underfunded. It had to take over a year. It had to take, no, not over a year, several years. I said over a year because it was a year after I did the story, so I'm counting from that time. But I remember by the time I was doing that story, the linear accelerator at the Cancer Diseases Hospital had not been in action for over 24 months. So it's been several years that this equipment was not working. And it took another year until we had to release money. In the interim, these Zambians had to go and get treatment from Tanzania. And the Zambian government said they would be footing this bill. Our health sector is consistently riddled with problems, because if it is not a shortage of drugs, essential drugs, it is aid being cut, it is no equipment, it is a national health insurance scheme that is in disarray, it's in a shambles. NEMA is a beautiful idea that is just leaving citizens stranded. And you see all of these things happening in our health sector. And it gets worse. And I'm so sorry to depress you this evening, but there's more. There's more that just seems to be going terrible. And we can also talk about the fact that there's now a cholera outbreak. And 4 people, I beg your pardon, 4 people have died as of today. Yesterday was 3. Today, 4 people have died in the last 7 days from this cholera outbreak. And the cases have increased to 45. From 24 to 45. 45 cases of cholera. And of these, 25 are still admitted to hospital. And this is in Chililabombwe, where we're experiencing this.
Kasumbalesa, a bustling border post between Zambia and the Democratic Republic of Congo. It's a hub of activity with people crossing the border daily, but beneath the surface, a health crisis is brewing. Cholera outbreak has been reported in Chililabombwe district, with Kasumbalesa being the epicenter. Health authorities have confirmed 4 deaths and 45 cases, with 16 patients discharged and 25 are still admitted.
Almost all the cases we are recording, they are coming from Kasumbalesa. So, some who tested positive, they are food handlers, restaurant owners, and their artists. So as of yesterday, we even had a stakeholder meeting.
The outbreak has prompted a massive response from health authorities, with efforts focused on containment, treatment, and prevention.
Intensified the sensitization, which is the information dissemination in the communities. That this is on board. They are passing through the communities. And the other things, we have got our CDVs who are going door to door, sensitizing people in the community, especially targeting people from Kasumba area there, the Kasumba area market, because that is where almost everyone is coming from.
Provincial Health Director Dr. Charles Amwinona has called for continued vigilance and continued cooperation in adhering to hygiene standards and preventive guidelines to combat the outbreak effectively.
People died while at home, even when somebody knew that they had signs and symptoms. So one of the messages we are encouraging is that if you think you have signs and symptoms that are leading to cholera or community.
The fight against cholera requires a collective effort as the people of Chililabombwe district come together to combat this outbreak. Love Mosondash for Diamond News.
And so we can't seem to catch a break We can't seem to catch a break. But and I was just this afternoon. I took a moment and I was thinking about how exhausting it must be to be serving in this government, huh? I mean, honestly, it must be really exhausting because it's one thing after the next. You have drought after the drought. You have debt after debt. You have Donald Trump. You have cholera. It's a lot of things happening. But I believe that's what governance is. And I mean, even when you look at it from a very generic point of view, that's kind of what life is. It's a consistency of ups and downs. Some ups and some downs here and there. But I think that the government needs a very quick response to this, especially the cholera outbreak. And my problem is just a few weeks ago, we had an outbreak of cholera in Nakonde. And then when we had an outbreak in Nakonde, government sent vaccines. We don't need vaccines to go when there's an outbreak. We need vaccines to go to prevent the diseases, right? And Zambia is considering, I don't quite remember. I was in Rwanda when this question was asked. Zambia is going to open a manufacturing plant for vaccines, cholera vaccines. And colleagues there were asking me, who is your target market for this? Because it's 2024 and cholera. And I was very honest. I said, no, we are our own target market because this is a problem that we deal with quite consistently. If we are not going to immediately deal with the sanitation problem, we must be able to prevent the possibility of people dying, at least in whatever way we can. We can talk about all these other issues as we go along the way, but I think the preservation of life is what should be our priority. And we shouldn't be embarrassed to try and save lives. We should work towards it and do whatever is within our power. I completely agree that we need to fix our sanitation problem, but we also need to preserve the lives of our citizens. Let's take a breather from all this depressing health talk. This episode has been really depressing. I'm not promising that the next topic is not depressing. It probably is much more depressing because we are talking about drum roll. Drum roll, isn't it? Drum roll. This is a drum beat. Okay, that's not a sad thing. It's a very jolly. But anyway, we talk about the energy sector. My producer here he's just exhausted with the depressing news that we have, but that's where we are. That's where we are. Come on, we'll celebrate when load shedding ends. But it's still here, and that's the reality of what we're living now. But President Hakainde Hichilema is in Tanzania, and he is urging Africans to take their commitment seriously and not wait for external forces to compel them into action. Speaking at the Mission 300 Africa's Energy Summit of Heads of State in Tanzania, President Hichilema emphasized the importance of self-reliance. This is so ironic, considering the problems he has when he comes back here. It says, well, we have to be self-reliant and that Africans must take charge of their development initiatives. The president says that there's a need for the continent to adopt the principle of charity begins at home, noting that while partners are available to support Africa, the primary responsibility for driving growth, business development, and well-being of its people rests with Africans themselves. Well, I agree with the big man. I completely agree on that.
The Mission 300 Africa Energy Summit has brought together African heads of state with the goal of tackling the continent's energy crisis, which affects over 600 million people. The summit held in Tanzania focused on strategies to ensure access to affordable, sustainable energy for millions of Africans by 2030.
It is important that we, as Africans, take commitments we make serious and not expect someone to whip us. We must really drive ourselves. there's an imperative to drive ourselves. Partners are there to work with us, as we've seen here on this platform, but we basically must say charity begins at home. And it's good for our people, it's good for businesses, good for growth, it's good for commercial viability. With growing economies, it's easier to do things. But
this summit also attracted the support of international leaders, including the World Bank and the United Nations.
Together, let us decisively use Mission 300 to deliver 300 million people in Africa with access to electricity in all your countries by 2030.
Over the coming 5 to 6 years, and this is the only place where I'd like to correct my friend Arkeen, the World Bank is actually putting $30 to $40 billion into this effort.
Being open to new technology solutions that today are at a price point where this vision of success is affordable and possible, and in fact the least cost way to provide universal electrification, gives me hope that this will in fact be different and be successful.
Combined with systemic initiatives like the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, Africa is uniquely positioned to lead the global energy transition.
African leaders are hopeful that with continued collaboration, Africa can overcome its energy challenges and power its growth for the future.
Together with the private sector, development partners, financial institutions, and civil society, we can bridge the energy gap through action, our actionable energy compacts.
Africa is ready to provide a business environment that will make it easier to achieve this agenda in this space, in the general business side, economies, to support the social side.
As leaders move forward, our eyes will be on the continent's progress towards achieving its energy goals by 2030. Best Jerry, Diamond News.
This summit that the president is attending in Tanzania is very important. The World Bank projects that there's 600 million people in Africa who have no access to electricity. And the target is that within the next 5 years, we should increase access to 300 million. So that's half of that 600 million. We increase access to electricity but 300 million. And this is going to be done through partnerships. I think that explains why the World Bank was funding the interconnector with Tanzania, between Zambia and Tanzania, because Tanzania has done extremely well. I believe that's the reason why the summit is being held in Tanzania. They've done really well with their energy sector and the excess power that they have. And according to the president, she also says that they are actually aiming for even much more. They're aiming for much more energy production and possibly export. And this is why they are hosting this. But their initiative is, you know, that energy is the bedrock of any kind of productivity in an economy. So these countries are coming together to try and find solutions to Zambia, not to Zambia's energy problems, to Africa's energy problems, but Zambia also trying to find its own solutions. The water levels are rising steadily, but I hate to break it to you, they are not drastically rising. It's a very slow pace. To be fair, the Zambezi River Authority and ZESCO themselves did previously say that the increase is, us reaching maximum capacity will take about 3 seasons. But I don't think it's going to take 3 seasons before you see 24 hours of electricity. There is a magic wand that will fix this problem, and it's called a general election that is lined up for 2026. And we'll come back here and talk about how people endured 21 hours of load shedding. But there's also been an improvement from ZESCO. They are now supplying electricity for 12 hours each day. Have you noticed that?
Sundays.
It's 12 hours in a day.
For us, I thought with Sundays, it's like some days they'll give you 6, other days they'll give you 12, other days they'll give you the whole day.
So what they're doing is they've staggered the electricity in a day. So you have electricity for 6 hours, you don't have electricity for another 6 hours, and then you have electricity for 6 hours, and then you don't have electricity for another 6 hours, and that constitutes 24 hours. So that's kind of what they've done to stagger the access to electricity. And maybe I'm speaking on behalf of people who've not experienced it, but that's the official position by ZESCO on how much electricity they're supplying. But what's funny today, that was yesterday, the vice president was meeting some officials from Namibia. And, it was a bilateral engagement. Zambia talking about great things about Namibia. And then the Namibian official thanks Zambia for continuing to export electricity. The vice president was almost saying, don't say that, because he said, we know that Zambia is experiencing load shedding and they're experiencing low access to electricity. But even in the midst of all of this, you've continued to export electricity to us. The vice president chuckled, and I think the experienced politician that she is, she sat there and said, oh my goodness, you have no idea what you have just done. But his was more like, we are neighbors, and it was a neighborly thing to say. But I think it was also very, very bizarre, because I think that nobody would take kindly to such a comment that we don't have electricity, and you're saying, and let's be honest, government has been very sketchy about this issue of exporting electricity. They've not come out clear enough anyway to talk about it and address it. And so to just get a confirmation from an outsider in front of the media caught everybody off guard. But it is what it is. It's the truth. We're exporting electricity not just to Namibia. We're exporting electricity even to Malawi. So we are doing all these things. And I guess the other countries are so grateful that we're doing all of this. They're so grateful that we're giving them this electricity. I don't know if we're giving it generously as a population here in Zambia. But that's a picture of what's going on. Yeah, you want to say something? Mm. Yeah.
I'm like, let me show off. And I go like, well, it doesn't work like that. And I'm like, Kariba is not working at the right capacity right now. It's at 3%. At the same time last year, 15%? And it's going to be a couple months to Kariba hits its peak. And I'm like, I'm bringing out strong points.
Oh my goodness.
And she goes like, you sound like UPND. I swear, I'm not texting her again.
Oh my gosh. Oh my God. Okay, but that's good that you're understanding these things. It means we're doing something right. We're doing something right. At least if people are able to understand, then we're doing something right. Let me just read some of the comments. People have left some comments here. Things are bad. That's Dr. Luke. Russia and China might just step in. I think that's a vicious cycle, isn't it? If we are waiting for Russia and China to step in, that's like a vicious cycle, and we're probably gonna get back to right where we are. Jonah, I don't know these 12 hours you're talking about. I know darkness more than I know electricity in my house. Oh, I'm so sorry. I guess we need to follow it up, and we need to hold ZESCO accountable for the commitments that they make. But that brings us to the conclusion of our space. Thank you so much for joining in. And yeah, let's do it again. Let's do it again. Let's do it again. These are the stories making news in our beautiful country. And as I always say, it's very important for us to talk about our country, because if we don't talk about our country, other people will talk about it. if we don't fix our own problems, other people are going to fix them, and then they'll freeze the aid. And then we'll be talking about how vulnerable we are, and yet we do have the opportunity to address these issues and speak about them together. For now, though, thank you for listening. Have a lovely day. Bye-bye.